When you go to combat, you can't even paint the full picture for anybody at home. I'm ready to come home alive at any means necessary.
I turned into a person who took all of that emotion, all of that guilt, all of that anger, all of that frustration. I put it into like a little box and I just fucking buried that bitch as deep as possible inside me.
Once you have to put a poncho liner over 3 dead Marines, it changes everything.
People always used to tell me, there's a purpose for you in life. God has a purpose for you. They gotta not have a purpose. My brothers, I'm like, I don't get it.
Orders, get your gear on, stay low. Let's go, let's go. Spread out, squadron, spread them out.
I remember telling Dunham, hasty vehicle searches. I could see he was listening to me, but he was also looking down the line of cars. He saw something.
Over here.
We come up on this white SUV. As soon as I hit the second door, I see it. AKs and RPGs in the back seat.
I looked up and I saw Miller running.
Dunham's got the guy on the ground and they're fighting.
Jason was on top of him. He said, no, 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 watch his hands. And the grenade went off.
It's like a slideshow. Jason's body just like goes up and then his head just comes back down flat. Not many people are within a foot of a grenade and can tell you about it.
Hey, two priorities!
Anybody outside dies right now, Sergeant Cole. I don't care if you believe in God or not. Whenever your friends went down, you found God. Stand by, get ready. Hang in there, we're gonna get you out of here. We loaded him up on a bird. Told him, you're going home. Go see your family.
On a dusty road in western Iraq, Corporal Dunham gave his life so that the men under his command might live.
What do you say to the parents of the guy who gave his life for you? Like, what do you tell them?
Just that single moment of selflessness, he put the challenge to us all. How will we live? How will we make a difference?
I just try to remember who I am and what I'm expected to be to my Marines.
Jason gave me my life for his, so I have to be good enough to accommodate both.
I would have taken the spot in a heartbeat. I wanted to do my job that day, and I wasn't able to. And that's something I have to live with now.
What happens on that hill, in that Humvee, in that Amtrak, on that helo, on that dusty road will be with you that day, 15 years later, and the day before your death. That encounter changes you for the rest of your life.
All that we have has been given to us.
What we do with what has been given.
It's how we honor those who gave.
Take what you're given, make it count, and don't stop.
David, welcome to the show.
Hey, Chris, thanks for having me, man.
Yeah, no problem. No problem. I've been seeing everything that you've been putting out there as far as this documentary goes. And a lot of people who listen to this show probably also listen to the Jocko podcast where we were talking about Corporal Jason Dunham and the story behind how he received the Medal of Honor. Before we get into that, I just want to talk a little bit about who you are and your background and what you've done in the past. Could you give us a quick 3-minute synopsis?
Yeah. I got out of the Navy and went back to school. We're from Connecticut. Finished up, started working at ESPN as an editor. Came out to Los Angeles to get into film. Got stuck at Fox Sports for 10 years as an editor. But I've always been interested in writing and directing documentary work. So I did a documentary on a teacher I had from high school who was a Marine at Quezon. And that was 20 years ago. That was kind of my first thing. And I've kind of been doing a little bit of that ever since. And, this story came about after a chance meeting with Jason on a flight. And I found out later that he was killed. And his mom actually reached out to me. She gave me a call. And next thing you know, I'm in upstate New York at their house, and here we are 15 years later.
So you actually met him on a flight while he was still alive.
It was a red eye, and I think it was a red eye. It was so long ago, I don't remember. I sat next to this kid, and he had a high and tight, and I knew he was a Marine, I could tell. And, me being former Navy, we started shooting the shit, and we just talked all night until we, hit our connection flight, and I said goodbye to him. And he was just one of those kids that was just, an unbelievable person. You meet these people in your life very, very, not very often. And as he left, he was leaving the plane. I said, hey, because I knew the war would start soon. I said, hey, take care of yourself over there. And he kind of had this shit-eating grin on his face, and he's like, yeah, no worries, man. And off he went. And then, I found out later through a friend actually turned me onto this website, iCasualties.org. So, and I hadn't even heard of it. And it lists all the KIAs at the time. So I went home that night and I started looking down the list and I saw this one name stand out from, kid from small town in upstate New York, based out of 29 Palms. And I didn't remember his last name. I just remember, his first name. So I Googled his name and hit the images and his picture popped up. And I was just, he was such a nice kid. I was just like, man, that's unbelievable. I can't believe he's dead, So, I sat down and wrote a story about it and I posted it on the Quezon Veterans website. I knew these guys really well and I knew they'd want to hear something like this. And, that story ended up in his hometown paper and his mom called me and I didn't know who it was. So I let it go to voicemail and then I listened to it. And, this is Deb Dunham and I'd like to talk to you about my son. And I honestly didn't know what to say to her. So I didn't call her. And 2 weeks later, she called again. And I still didn't answer the phone. And I literally sat there for about a half hour. And then I finally said, you got to call this woman. So I called her and it was a 2-hour conversation, with her and her husband. And they invited me up to their house. And I got on a plane and I went up there, and we've been friends ever since. And then as his Marines came back, I became them. And they were more like my little brothers. You know, they're all 10, 15 years younger than me. Mm-hmm. So I tried to do a documentary back then, but it was too soon, you know.
Let's talk a little bit about the circumstances behind Corporal Dunham's death, and kind of the things leading up to the reasons for the documentary.
Right.
For those who don't know, what happened?
Basically, what happened. This is the story that I've been told, and reading after action reports. Lieutenant Colonel Lopez headed out on a mission that day to the police station in Usaba. You know, they had built a police station and they had got all these recruits together. So they were there to check the situation out, see how the building came out, and pay some of these guys. So they all went there. Dunham's squad was providing security outside. After that wrapped up, Dunham was supposed to take his squad to a abandoned water treatment plant to look for like a FOB, a forward operating base, or a place where they could set up during the day or even at night. But when Lopez left and they started to head back to their firm base, they were ambushed. Small arms fire, RPGs. Dunham's guys, they heard it. Their staff sergeant, John Ferguson, told Dunham, you know, let's go. They got mounted up and they started heading to the ambush site. On their way, they were attacked. RPG came flying across the lead vehicle. Dunham stopped all the vehicles. They dismounted, took cover, and Ferguson split up the squad. Dunham, I want you to take your guys up this street and start checking those vehicles. And Ferguson has told me, he said, you know, I knew he was listening to me, but he saw as he kept looking at this one vehicle. And as soon as I was done telling him, he went straight for it with two of his Marines, Billy Hampton and Kelly Miller. He came around the passenger side. Miller was on the driver's side. Miller was on the passenger side, and Hampton was coming up the middle. As soon as Dunham reached that door, this guy jumped out and grabbed him by the throat. And Dunham was a big kid. You know, he was ripped. He kneed this guy in the chest and took him to the ground, running around. And right before that happened, Miller saw the RPGs in the back seat and AKs. So he looked up to warn Dunham, and that's when it went down. So he came running around. He had an asp that his brother sent him, you know, a police baton. So he extended it, came running around. Dunham had him on the ground and was punching him. And the guy kept fighting back. So Miller hit him in the head a few times, but the guy kept going. And by now, Hampton is standing above the two of them while they're on top of the insurgent, because Hampton was going to take the headshot, but he wasn't sure if he should, because he didn't want ricochet or anything to hit the other guys. So as Miller put a knee into the guy's chest, he put his hand on Dunham's back, because Dunham was off to the left, fumbling with something. And he was choking him with a baton. And as he was doing that, Dunham said, no, watch his hand. And then Hampton saw, till this day he wonders, you know, at that time I was wondering why Dunham had his Kevlar off, and it was on the ground. And as soon as he said that, he laid down on top of the Kevlar, and boom, they went off. And Hampton and Miller were thrown across the street. So when they came to, you know, they didn't know what the hell happened. So that's pretty much how happened, the incident.
So essentially what happened was they were wrestling around with this insurgent in the tussle, released a grenade, and Dunham had the clearness of mind to grab his Kevlar, place that Kevlar on top of the grenade, and put his body on top of the Kevlar.
Right.
And he absorbed the impact of the grenade, and then that saved his entire team, saved everybody around him. And at the time, he had not passed away immediately. There was a bit of a battle after that, right?
Yeah. Well, let me back up a minute. The most interesting thing about this is, a month before this incident happened, Corporal Dunham was sitting around with his lieutenant, Bull Robinson, and they were discussing what to do if you were faced with a live grenade. And Dunham said, well, I think if you took your Kevlar off and placed that down on it, and then laid on it, because your body Kevlar, it could absorb the blast, and you might be able to live. And the lieutenant said, no, there's no way. He's like, you wouldn't have time. He said, I bet you I could do it. He said, I'll be right back. So he went and got his gear, came back, stood there, loosened his chin strap. And he said, okay, Lieutenant, time me. So I told him, go. Dunham swooped his head down. The chin strap came forward. He caught his helmet in midair and slammed it on the deck in less than 2 seconds. So he had practiced this, you know. So when it happened, they knew what he did. All his guys knew what he did. But yeah, after the initial blast, he was medevaced out of there. I believe he was sent to Al-Assad first, and then eventually on to Germany. He in the expectant ward, and for people who don't know what the expectant ward is, that's basically where you're going to go if they know you're not going to live. So they put him in that room with some other Marines and soldiers, and there was a nurse, Heidi Kraft, or a psychologist, who went in there and sat with him, and she held his hand and talked to him. And at one point she said, if you can hear me, squeeze my hand. And he squeezed her hand. So she ran and got the doctor, and they immediately pulled him out of there and put him on a flight to Germany, where he went to Germany and was assessed there. And I think they knew that he wasn't going to make it, because they immediately got him to Bethesda, where he was met by his parents. So when his parents showed up at Bethesda, the Navy doctor was pretty blunt with them and said, listen, what you see is what you get. There are miracles, but if your son survives this, he'll never be the same. He won't know who he is. He won't be able to dress himself, feed himself, take care of himself. What you see is what you get. And if it was my son, I would let him go. So they had to make that decision, and Dan had a conversation with Jason before he left on that deployment. And Jason said to him, if anything happens to me and I'm in that kind of a state, don't leave me like that. And he had it in his living will as well. So they had to make the decision. I don't think Deb knew at the time until her husband sat her down and told her. And he was very, he didn't want his wife to hate him. That's what he has told me, because you got to make a decision, right? And it's a hard decision, but they made that decision and go. So
I can't imagine what that must be like for a parent to have to make that kind of a decision, to have to determine whether or not you're going to keep your son who's just in his 20s,
right,
and or whether or not you're going to pull the plug. That must have been so difficult, and for anybody out there who's ever been through that, I can't imagine. It's just crazy.
Yeah, I think it was devastating for them. I talk to them all the time now, and Dan has told me, it's like it never goes away. It's gotten better. It's 15 years, but it never goes away. The loss of a child like that, especially under those circumstances, right? It's very tragic. And so
now the Marines who were with Dunham after that, what happened with them? Well, what was the immediate impact on them? And I know that there had to be some talk of whether or not a Medal of Honor was going to be given or written up for.
I think that was pretty immediate. Staff Sergeant Ferguson knew what went down, and he told Captain Gibson at the time, who retired as Lieutenant Colonel, and they went and told Lieutenant Colonel Lopez, and he's right away, he's like, write it up. So Bull Robinson sat down and wrote it up. Getting back to Kelly and Billy, though, they were also medevac. They were hurt pretty bad. They didn't know they didn't know about Kelly. He had a artery in his arm that he was bleeding out that they didn't know about. So he was probably worse. And they got both of them out of there. Billy ended up in Germany. They both ended up in Germany, but they were separated from the battlefield. So even though they were both in Germany, they didn't know. But Billy managed to go up and see Jason while he was there. And he talks about it in the interview we did. And it's very, it's emotional to hear him talk about that. You know, you're sitting there standing, you know, before your squad leader and his, you know, head swollen and he's just severely injured and you're alive. And, you know, I think that's where a lot of his, because he asks that question now, so, you know, why him? Why not me? You know? And he also says, you know, if he could speak to him now, the question he would ask is why? You know, what made you think I was better than you? You know, so he carries that with him. They both do. But at least he got to see him those final days there. It was very hard for him to do that, you know. Kelly didn't get to see him, but they were both medevac to the States eventually. I think they both went to Bethesda and then on to San Diego. But yeah, the guys who didn't get hurt, it affected all of them, all the guys in Kilo, because he was such a leader, you know. And I mean, his senior officers will tell you that. I mean, you know, Ferguson will say that he had that it factor, you know, for a kid of such a young age to have that kind of leadership ability is, you know. He said, it took me 10 years as a Marine to get where he was at 22. You know, he was the Marine, he was the squad leader, and he didn't have to do all that grunt work, you know, filling sandbags or doing whatever. But all his guys will tell you, you know, if there was a task to do, all the other squad leaders were doing something else. And while we did all that crap work, but Jason was right there with us. He stood there with us and did it with us, you know, so they really respected him.
And he was initially in security forces before he transitioned over to a line company, right?
Yeah, correct. And I've also been in touch with a lot of those guys. They've been reaching out as well. I don't know what time frame when he ended up at 29 Palms, because I know he was with 3-4 for a while before he went to 3-7. Mm-hmm. So I'm still trying to uncover everything. But yeah.
Yeah, and that takes a remarkable leader to be able to come into a new unit and to be able to pick up the slack where somebody else might have left off and to deal with entirely new guys and in a new on the job training situation, you know. With this story, you know, this happened a long time ago, 15 years ago. And now your job as a documentarian is to bring this story back to life and mm-hmm. to present it to the public. And when I know you said you were going to make a movie about this years ago, and then you mm-hmm. had to table it because it was just too intense for the time. What brought it back to life? What was the thing that said, all right, I got to do this now?
You know, the experience of meeting him and finding out he was killed had a pretty big impact on me. You know, I was in the military during the Gulf War, and I had a lot of friends who served in the Marines in the Gulf War, and there was something about, I don't know, it just affected me to the point where, you know, it's like, you knew someone that was such a good soul, and he ended up dying. And then meeting his Marines and becoming so close to them and interviewing them, as hard as it was, you know, 6 months after the fact, right? They get back from deployment, and I've got them sitting down doing interviews. And it was just, you know, I have interviewed, you know, Vietnam veterans, and that's emotional, you know, stuff that happened 30 years before. You know, these guys went through this 6 months before that, and it was devastating to interview them. And if that affected me, you know, I had a personal stake in it. It was like, I cared about these guys, you know, I cared about the story. I cared about what happened. You know, those guys went on more deployments, and I cared even more because now we were friends, and I was always watching, you know, are these guys okay? You hear about a story because they went to Ramadi after that. It's like, all right, we lost 2 Marines in Ramadi, and I'm online like, who was it? You know, and these guys would call me from Ramadi, on a sat phone. So I tried to do it then, but I was like, you know what? These guys aren't ready. I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready to take something like that. I had 2 small kids at the time. So I kind of put it on the shelf and I said, maybe in the future we can open this up. And I've always felt a responsibility to Deb and Dan Dunham because I never finished it. I put a keepsake video together for them, good stories about their son, interviews I did with these Marines, and I gave that to them and they loved it, But personally for me, I felt like I was letting them down. I never finished that story, and for 15 years, I watched the transgression of coming back from war, getting out of the Marine Corps, going back to your hometowns. And I'm still in touch with these guys and I'm watching it happen, not all of them, but the drugs, the alcohol, suicides and depression and post-traumatic stress and all of that, TBI. And it just, and then that affected me, because I care about these guys, and it's like, you hate to see somebody like that you care about go through something like that, especially one Marine in particular, who I knew from the start when I first interviewed him, I'm like, I got to keep an eye on this guy. He was one of Jason's good friends, and he showed up on scene, minutes after it happened, and he didn't know it was Jason. That's how bad it was. Until the corpsman, cut off his blouse, and he saw his tattoo, and he knew. But he went back to his hometown and started with the meds from the VA, the painkillers for his injuries. And then when they cut him off of that, some son of a bitch turned him on to meth, intravenous. And for the last 6 years, he's been on a tear, in and out of jail. We tried to get him into rehab 3 times. And it's just devastating because I don't know that guy. I know the guy that used to be here in California, and, we'd spend weekends together, cookouts and stuff. I know that guy. But this other guy, it just breaks my heart to see him like that. So you combine all that stuff and me staring at those drives every April when the anniversary comes around, and that little voice in my head saying, you need to finish that. You need to finish that. So, a year ago, I sat down with my co-producer, Rick Molesky, who came out. He's a Navy guy too. We came out here together. We met at Southern Connecticut State, and he said, we need to do our own thing. And I'm like, yeah, we do. He's like, well, what about that Dunham story? I said, do you want to help me with that? He's like, yeah, it's a great story. It's kind of a sense of, how a chef prepares food for everybody every night, right? And he doesn't know how good it is. Yeah, I don't know if it's good. Try it. When you're so close to something like this, for a while I was like, I don't know if it's a good story. Is it a good story? Because you're in it. You're so close to it. So we decided, yeah, let's do it. So I called Deb and Dan and I told them, I said, this is what I want to do. I said, I understand, people have come at you to do other things in Hollywood or whatever, but I want to do a documentary, and I want Jason's Marines to tell his story. And then once we learn who your son was, the story's going to shift onto those Marines who are now living. How did they pick those pieces up? How did they move forward? All the stumbling blocks along the way. I mean, they're all doing great now, but it took a long time for them to get there. And they all say it, it's good you're doing this now because we've all had that time to let it sink in and reflect. So.
Yeah. And that's the truth, because if you did it right after or just a few years after, the story wouldn't have been complete, really, because
right.
it really is about, his memory, what it's become. And, the thing that being a Marine, one of the things about Marines is that we thrive on story. We thrive on story. We remember
you learn in boot camp. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. We remember guys like John Basilone,
right.
and Chesty Puller. And stories like this, they carry so many lessons that so many young Marines are going to learn this lesson in leadership, this lesson in self-sacrifice. You know, what does it take, right? Getting rid of your ego and living for a higher purpose, you know, and I think that was you know, whether it was providence or whether it was, you know, your own decision making, that's turning out for the best the way you're doing it. But the other thing is, you know, just thinking about the challenges here, right? When you do have time extended from the story, and luckily you got to sit down with a lot of these guys afterwards as well, and you knew these guys. The challenges you're facing right now in getting this documentary out there, what does that look like? What do you have to do now as you're putting this thing together?
There's a lot of challenges, you know, because in order to do the story we want to do, you know, if you handed this off to a production company in Hollywood, they're going to do it like something you're going to see on the History Channel or whatever. But because I have such a personal stake and I feel such a responsibility, I'm not willing to just take somebody's money and have them turn around and say, okay, then now this is what we're going to do, guys. You know, so I don't care how long it takes. I'm not doing this for money. I'm doing this to honor Corporal Dunham and his Marines and future Marines, you know, who are going to watch this. And, you know, there's going to be more wars, right?
Right.
There's going to be guys going through these things together. So, you know, the challenge is there, but I've surrounded myself with such a good group of guys. And that was, you know, on purpose. I said, I want a crew of veterans. I want to know why these guys are there. I don't want people there for 9 to 5. You know, this is, you know, and, you know, I look at Jocko as a great example of, you know, how to take charge and take, you know, leadership and take ownership, right? You take ownership of this project. I took ownership of this project. You know, it's only been really me, you know, working. I mean, this is every day. You know, I have a full-time job, but this is a second full-time job. So I'm putting in 80, 90 hours a week, but I don't care. You know, I'm going to do whatever I have to do in order to tell that story. You know, if it takes a year, great. If it takes 2 years, 3 years, whatever it takes, it's going to get done, you know, and that's my mentality on this. Luckily, we've had people, you know, donate and other private investors reach out that we're still talking to. So, you know, it seems like everything, you know, when I started this, it was like, okay, this is going to be tough. And now we're at a point where this thing is moving on its own. And I feel like I'm just a passenger. You know, every day something new pops up and I'm like, wow, I can't believe that's happened. You know, I can't believe we got on Jocko's podcast so these guys could tell this story, you know. So every day there's like a new opportunity that comes up. I mean, I've also had people reach out that are, you know, you're like, okay, what's this person about? You know, so
yeah,
you have to weed through all that. So there's a lot of challenges.
Yeah, that episode that you guys did over on Jocko's podcast, that was so intense. Just listening to it. I mean, I think it's a 4 or 5 hour episode, but the whole time I was sitting there and just like, wow, I just can't imagine what the feeling was like in that room, bringing these guys together.
I was sitting on the floor for the whole thing, and I had my DP in there shooting as well. And man, it was heavy, you know. I don't know if you can hear it, but Echo was, you know, everybody had tears. You know, I thought Echo had allergies or something. I just looked over and he was sobbing, you know. We got to the part where they had to let Jason go, and it was hard for those guys to do that, you know, but Jocko was so gracious and, you know, he understands. He's been there. And the interesting thing is, before we started the podcast, you know, Jocko told Trent Gibson, Lieutenant Colonel Trent Gibson, you know, we have a similar thing here because I lost my guy, Mikey Mansour, Medal of Honor recipient. You lost Jason Dunham. So I understand, you know, what you went through and continue to go through. And he said that to Kelly and Billy and Ferg, you know, and he told them straight up before we started, he's like, you know, I just want to let you know this is going to suck. But everyone at this table has been through this, and we're here together, and we're going to do this together. You know, he was just a true, gentleman, is just very gracious with these guys. And I think that's why he's so successful with his podcast, because those guys, people who go in there, they know they're good, you know, and they know he understands.
Absolutely.
So,
and you know, we got to hear from Lieutenant Colonel Gibson and the other guys during the show. What impact did that have on them? How have they been since coming in there? And I guess it was almost like listening to them, and maybe this is the wrong term, but it was almost like listening to them emotionally regurgitate everything that had been building up over the past 15 years.
Yeah, it was. It was hard it was especially hard, I think, for Billy Hampton, you know? I mean, I interviewed Billy and Kelly over a year ago for 4 hours, and we unpacked it. And it went well, and it was fine. And, you know, afterwards, they were like, wow, you know, I needed to do that. You know, I needed to get that out. But I think to have you know, all 4 of them in the room, Ferg, Hampton, Miller, Trent, and, you know, they were all there when it happened, and they're all unpacking it together. I think that was really hard for them, you know, and I think it was hard for Trent, and he's an amazing dude. He's, he told me that he never used to be a hugger. You know, he was a hardcore Marine officer. I mean, I saw him give a speech at the National Museum of the Marine Corps in 2007, and it was an unbelievable speech, right? But that was a different Trent. The Trent now, you know, is the Trent who has been reflecting on what he went through, the Marines he lost. And he said, you know, I never used to be a hugger. And there's a story behind that. I had a young lieutenant who got hit, and he was in the aid tent, and he was dying. And he was still raring to go, patch me up and get me out there, you know, and I lied to him. I told him he was going to be okay, but I knew he was going to die, you know. And this young lieutenant was a hugger. He'd hug his guys, you know, hey, what's up? And he said, since that time, I've become a hugger because of that, you know. So, and I witnessed that at their reunion in Phoenix last year. I can't describe, I mean, you would get this, but I can't describe for, you know, the average civilian, non-veteran, the feeling in that room when you've got your commander and you've got all these Marines coming in 15 years later. The love in that room where this, you know, guy would walk in, he's in his mid-30s now, who was a young Marine 15 years ago. Trent would see me, walk up to him, and he'd grab him by the head. He's like, how you doing, man? You know, and he would just hug him. And just witnessing that, you could feel it in the room. You could just feel the emotion and the love in that room that this man still has for his Marines, you know. Other branches aren't like that. You know, the SEAL teams might be, I don't know. But the Marine Corps is a special breed, you know, and they still hold on to that. So it was amazing to witness that. You know, we shot some of that, so.
Yeah, and you know, honestly, again, it goes back to this idea of story, and you know, being able to use this to educate other Marines and honestly other service members as well. You know, to show them what sacrifice really means, and I think that, you know, what comes out of this is going to have such an impact on Marine Corps history.
Absolutely.
Such an impact on future fighting men, and such an impact on just the esprit de corps
right.
that we all love so much, and what makes us Marines, you know.
I think you know, there's a twofold thing to this, you know, for Marines who served in combat that see this. I hope they take something away from it, like, you know, because we're going to show how these guys have moved forward. You know, all these guys talk about we named it the gift because they keep talking about in interviews, you know, Jason gave me this gift, and I've seen it. You know, we were in San Diego at Jocko's. Kelly Miller had his little boy there, and I couldn't help but stare at that little boy and think, and you're here because of what Jason did. You know, if he hadn't done that, your father wouldn't be here. And that really hit me, seeing that, you know. So I hope soldiers, Marines, whoever suffers from any kind of battle fatigue or whatever you want to call it, post-traumatic stress, and is having a hard time, I hope when they watch this that they can take something away from it to say, you know, these guys struggled. Look what they went through. They were standing next to their squad leader, a guy they loved, who took a grenade for them, and they got to live with that. If they can do that and move forward, so can I. You know, I hope people, that's what they take away from it, combat veterans. On the flip side, on the civilian side, I hope civilians take a hard look at it and take something away from it and understand the cost and the struggle that all these guys have gone through. Because, you know, and I say this on the Indiegogo, you hear that phrase, you know, thank you for your service. I hear it all the time. And I don't blame people who say it, who don't know anything about the military. They don't know what else to say, right? And it's nice. We all like to hear that, you know, thank you for your service. Okay, well, I didn't do anything, but thanks. I don't think people truly understand what those words mean. And I'm hoping when they watch this and learn what these Marines went through, what Jason did, the next time they say those words in an airport, in a restaurant, wherever they are, that those words will have new meaning for them. You know, they're going to remember Jason Dunham, Kelly Miller, John Ferguson, Trent Gibson, Billy Hampton, and they're going to walk up to that young Marine in an airport, soldier, airman, whoever, Navy, and they're going to put out their hand and say, thank you for your service, but they're going to know why they're saying it. You know, I hope. Right.
So. And then here's the other aspect of it that you know, I think is something that's equally important, because we have a lot of both veterans and young service members who listen to this show. And a lot of you guys who are still in, one of the things you have to remember is that your time in isn't forever. Like, it's a very short period of time in your life. And it's easy to get wrapped up in all the bullshit that comes at you every single day, particularly in an infantry line unit, or if you're in the Marine Corps, you're going to deal with a lot of BS. At the same time, what you've got to be able to do is you've got to look at what you're doing and see the importance in it. See how this time of your life can really shape the rest of your life, right? And it's a real opportunity for those out there who are in the service right now, regardless of what branch of the military you're in, to become more present, to understand that, you know, this time is going to be important. You're going to learn so many things, and you need to look at it as something that you really need to put effort into getting something out of for yourself.
Absolutely. Because you don't think about that when you're in, you know, you don't, it's just a job, right? You're doing your thing and you got to go to point A to point B, you know, do this, do that. And you go through the motions and you're doing your job. It's not until later, for me anyway, when you look back and reflect on what you did. And, you know, somebody told me once after I got out, years after I got out, they're like, oh, you were in the Navy. What'd you do? I was like, I was a boatswain's mate. What do they do? Stand watch, you know, and I was a helmsman. What's a helmsman? I drove a ship. You drove a ship? Yeah. Well, what kind of ship? Guided missile cruiser. How big was it? I don't know, 600 footer. You drove a 600-foot warship? And that's when it dawned on me, because when you're doing it, you're just doing it because it's your job.
Right.
But you look back now and you reflect, you're like, yeah, I guess I did do that, you know. And I look at these guys who were, you know, young Marines, leading men. You know, you're 20 years old and you're a squad leader, you're a corporal. You know, the corporal's the backbone of the Marine Corps, right? You're 20 years old and you've got, you know, these souls in your hand. You know, you have this immense responsibility, and that'll be probably the biggest responsibility you will ever have in your life. You know, I mean, a CEO of a company doesn't have that kind of responsibility, where you have those lives in your hands. And it amazes me, you know, that these guys do that. at such a young age, you know?
Right. It's a huge factor in that I think everybody needs to recognize, particularly those of you who are still in.
Mm-hmm.
When it comes to getting this out there, obviously there's a lot of people who have to get involved. You've been able to build a team around this, right? And I know that, you know, we had Vincent Vargas on the show, a few other people. Can you talk to me about what that was like, getting people on board, trying to get people on the team?
Yeah, you know, I had a plan from the beginning. I'm going to go back to Jocko again because I read his book, Extreme Ownership, and you know, all those fundamentals in that book, we a lot of them we learned, you know, starting in boot camp, and you know, you learn them then. You're like, okay, why are we doing this? So I don't know. But later in life, I look back and I'm like, wow, okay, I don't run away from things. I look at it head on instead of, you know, if you hadn't had that experience, you might say, oh, I can't do that. That's just too, I can't do that. But I don't have that mentality anymore. And, you know, and then refreshing myself with his book, you're like, okay, let's take ownership of this, right? So I have a friend, 2-7 Marine, who's a musician, John Preston. And about 6 years ago, he called me up, and I met him in 2004 when Dunham thing was going on. He was going to do some music for me then. He called me about 6 years ago and said, you know, I want to make another run at my music. You know, I want to, you know, help veteran issues and do things. And I said, okay. So I worked with him and produced a lot of behind the scenes stuff and, you know, promo stuff for the social media. So as I was doing that, that's when I really started to take notice of the veteran community. And I told John, I said, bro, there's a movement going on out there, man. I said, this isn't the Vietnam generation that sat around and kind of waited. What's the VA going to do for me? I was like, this generation is taking charge. These guys are starting companies. They're starting nonprofits. They're starting groups. They're starting, you know, bands, music, businesses, whatever, you know, Grunt Style, you know, Black Rifle Coffee. These guys are all doing this. And they're taking their, you know, some of their proceeds and they're putting it back into helping veterans. I mean, we've never seen that before in the history of, you know, our veteran community. So I saw how these guys operated, you know, and from the get-go, I'm like, I need to get these guys behind this. You know, I need to get Vinny Vargas. I need to get Jocko Willink. I need to get Scott Hussey. You know, I need to get these guys in the veteran community to see what we're doing and understand, you know, we're not just a group of people who work in Hollywood trying to do a project. We're a group of veterans trying to do a project that's going to help veterans and even educate, you know, the civilian world. We need to relate that to these guys in the veteran community. So I reached out to my friend Jamie Kaler, who was a naval officer. He's a comedian and actor now. I said, can you put me in touch with Vinny? Yeah, here's his number. I text Vinny, take a look at this trailer. Right away, he got back to me. Bro, are you kidding me? What can I do? So we started talking and I said, are you interested in coming on to help produce? Absolutely. So I got him in and we've been working, you know, he's been really helping me with the social media stuff. We were having lunch one day and I said, all right, step 2, we need to get on Jocko's podcast. I need to get these guys on there. He's like, well, I have his email. So I said, perfect. I sat down on a Sunday night, wrote a long email to Jocko. This is who I am. This is where I'm from. This is my connection to this story. This is what we want to do. Would you be interested in having the 2 Marines who were standing next to Corporal Dunham when that grenade went off and lived? 24 hours later, I'd be honored. I put my ops director on this email. Let's set it up. And I was like, wow, unbelievable. He flew with these guys all in, paid for the hotel, and did it. So that was the start, you know. And now I have other people in the veteran community contacting me. Scott Hussey, you know. I spoke to Rudy Reyes there for a little while. There's just so many, you know, who are sending me messages. And the messages I get from other Marines and even Army, you know, Navy, any military person, they just send me these unbelievable messages, you know, like, I just watched that trailer, man, and man, I needed that. It was like I was back with my bros for a minute, you know, and I really needed that today. And I was like, wow. And I got a message from James Castaneda, and you see him in the trailer. He's the guy in the middle who says, I just wanted to do my job that day, but I couldn't. And now I guess I have to live with that, you know, and that part always gets me. He sent me a text on Veterans Day, the day we launched Indiegogo. And it was a picture of him and his kids. And he said, for years, my kids have been asking me to go to their school and talk about my experiences. And I always shied away from it. But after watching the trailer, it made me realize what Jason gave me. And it's these two beautiful kids that call me dad. Man, I saw that and I had tears in my eyes. And I said, that's why we're doing this. That's why we're doing this. So, you know.
And that concept, the gift concept, realizing what Jason gave those Marines, but not only what he gave those Marines, what he gave all of us. I think that more veterans need to realize that too, because, you know, if you've done your time, you got out, you know, it's not just about sitting there and saying, okay, I served. You also have to realize that a lot of these guys who sacrifice themselves, all these guys who sacrifice themselves, they did it so you can live an amazing life after you get out of service, right? And that's why, you know, being in the military should be one of the greatest things you do in your life. It shouldn't be the only thing. Right? You owe it to people like Jason Dunham to live the best life that you can. You do.
Right. Yeah. And I think, you know, and I think that's hard for guys, you know, like Kelly and Billy, because they say it. They're like, it's hard, man. It's hard to move forward, you know, because of, like Kelly says it best. He's like, sometimes I used to think, I wish it was that had ate the grenade, because I feel like it's harder to live with it than to just, you know, not be alive. You know, Jason doesn't have to carry that. And I can't imagine what it's like to carry that every day. But right now it's 15 years on, and they're starting to realize a lot of things, you know, and I'm sure, you know, wives and children have helped that a long way, because they all thank their wives. Like, you know, this woman has stood by me. You know, I look at my kids and I love my kids to death. You know, it's like, man, if he hadn't done that, I wouldn't have any of that, you know. Right. But it's still hard for them. It's always there, but I think they're learning how to manage that and pick up those pieces and move forward and take that experience, as awful as it was, and try to, you know, they all say it, to do good. You know, I've been given this opportunity. Someone handed me my life. Now it's up to me to do good, to be a good man, to do the right things, you know, educate people about what he did, what he gave me, you know, whatever I have to do to better myself and help people around me, you know, be a better man. So.
Absolutely. Now, I know you got the Indiegogo campaign going on right now, and you've raised a bit of money. I know that campaign, it's going on for another day or two.
Yeah, it ends tomorrow at midnight, I believe. Thursday night at midnight. So.
Okay. And are you guys going to be continuing to take donations after that? Absolutely.
I'm looking into that now, setting something up. If we have to do another campaign, we'll do another campaign. I've been talking to some private investors who, you know, one is a former Marine. Oh, I shouldn't say former, right? No. One is a Marine who served from 2000 to 2004, who's now a real estate investor, and he's done quite well for himself. And we're in serious talks with him, and he wants to come on and help fund this thing, and which is a blessing, right? Because our biggest fear was to take money from someone who would turn around and say, okay, this is how we're doing it. But to have a guy call me or reach out to me on Christmas Eve. He reached out to me because of an article he read on military.com. He said, you know, my name's so-and-so. I was a Marine from 2000 to 2004. I want to contribute and I want to talk to you. So 2 days later, I was on the phone with him for 2 hours, you know, and he had a lot of great questions. He wanted to know who I was, why I was doing it, what my motivation was. And I wanted to know who he was, you know, and the minute he told me he was a Marine, he understood the story and he feels compelled because he's a Marine to do something because he can, to give something back, right? So I got Vinny and our other co-producer Rick, and we did a conference call with him. We're all meeting in about 3 weeks to discuss moving forward and seeing what we're going to do. But it's like, it's a blessing. It's like, this is like the perfect thing, right? This guy's a Marine. He wants to let us do our thing because we've been doing this for, you know, 20 or something years. And he doesn't want to be hands-on. He doesn't want to tell us how to do it. He knows. He's already listened to my, you know, my speech of, you know, what I told you now. He said, okay, I get why you're doing it. I understand. So I don't think a lot of people in Hollywood ever, I can't get, you know, I had a meeting with a guy in Beverly Hills who was a nice guy and listened to me for an hour, but when we were done, I'm like, he's not the right guy. You know, he, in my heart, he could sit there and say, yeah, we'll do this, we'll do that. But I'm like, he doesn't understand. You know, he doesn't understand the gravity of this story and what happened. He may try to, and that's not his fault. But I just want someone involved who understands that, you know. I think the biggest Hollywood person who would be somebody like Peter Berg. You know, I think his experience working with Marcus Luttrell on Lone Survivor had probably changed him, probably gave him a better understanding of what, you know, our service members go through and what our veterans continue to go through and what they carry with them for the rest of their life. So we'd love to talk to him.
Peter, if you're listening out there. So when we publish this episode, we're going to get some links up there as far as places where people can help, places where people can donate, because obviously the more money you get for this, the more you're going to be able to do. And definitely want to make sure that we're helping you do that as much as possible. Right. Pick up with where can people go to learn more and keep up with the project?
I think the best place would be Facebook and Instagram. I mean, Facebook, you can type in @Kilo42, which is Jason Dunham's call sign, or @The Gift Documentary. I believe both come up. And Instagram, you can type in @The Gift Documentary, and we're also on Twitter @The Gift Doc. So awesome. I need to set up another site so we can start taking some more donations, or continue to take donations.
Awesome. And, you know, as far as, you know, for our listeners out there, any last bit of advice or words or a message that you want them to get from this?
Yeah, you know, for veterans, I hope when they watch this documentary that they'll take something away from it that'll help them. You know, I'm sure there's a lot of guys out there who haven't reached that point where they're ready to talk about things or might be suffering from some stuff, you know, and I just want them to know that, you know, they're not alone. And I hope they see something in this that allows them to stand up and say, yeah, you know, I can talk about this now, you know. And for the civilian side, you know, I hope they have a better understanding of what these guys go through, guys and girls, you know. And it's not easy, you know, so they understand, have a better understanding of, you know, just combat and war and you know, the struggles these guys face. And so the next time they do say, you know, thank you for your service, they'll understand what those words mean. You know, so.
Awesome. Well, David, number one, I just want to thank you for being the steward of this story.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, like I said, I think this story is going to have a major impact, not just on those who go to see it or on those who know the story, but how this story is going to be passed down through generations of Marines and
Right.
generations of service members. And so thank you for doing that. Thank you for your service.
Thank you.
And, you know, I keep us updated on this project because I definitely think it's going to be absolutely amazing.
That's awesome. Thanks, Chris.
And to everybody else out there, I want to thank you for listening to this. You know, definitely head over to the links we provide on the show notes. If you can, give a donation. Anything's going to help to get this project get off the ground. And, you know, take that message. Remember the gift you've been given, and live this life. Now, live it the best you can. Give what you can give into making this world a better place. And with that, guys, we'll be back at you later on this week with some more awesome content. This is Chris and Dave out.
Thanks, brother.